Actually, this section that you just received that's to the end of this class. So we're almost done. And in terms of the second half of the book, the second half, I mentioned that last night for some people, it deals with the opposite. After dealing with the diseases of the heart, it deals with ornamenting the heart with the states and stations of certainty. So, inshallah, I'm going to do that next, in February, starting. We looked at fakhar and kibrun, and these are serious illnesses of the heart. One of the things that has been pointed out is the idea of the mean, what's called al-wasita in Arabic. Al-wasita is the mean. And one of the things, the dangers of virtues is that virtues are means between extremes, with the exception of justice, which is the opposite of injustice. So it has an opposite, but it doesn't have extremes. Now, the next disease that he talks about is a disease that is an extreme, and the virtue is humility. Ziyada leads to arrogance, and naqs, deficiency, leads to a state of abasement or humiliation, which is not a virtue in Islam. Some might argue actually in Christianity that it is a type of virtue, but in Islam it's definitely not a virtue. So he calls it a dhul, and in the Qur'an Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that ضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. Dhilla was actually part of an affliction given to Bani Israel for their disobedience. So it's actually the result of disobedience often that Allah afflicts the people with this abasement. For being arrogant, He abases them, right? So, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and then it sets. And then the British Empire, the lion of Great Britain, becomes the tail of America, right? So that's a humiliation for the Anglo-Saxons of Britain, who've always seen the Americans as the colonies, right? I mean, these are like the low people and now those low people are now dictating for them their own foreign policies, etc., etc. So that's what Allah does with people. And it'll come to the Americans as well, just like it comes to everybody else. Their turn is coming as well. It's just a matter of time, and it's already a lot of signs and indications for that. So you can have dhul as a social phenomenon of a people. Many of the Muslim countries are in this status now. You'll find Muslims, unfortunately, who will do unbelievable things, just lie, cheat, steal to get a visa to a European country or America. Inside their countries, they'll do things that are, just shocking in terms of their own human dignity, and it all has to do with this lowliness, humiliation, right? So you can have it afflicted with a people. Now, despite that, you can also have a people that are afflicted with great tribulations, and they maintain their human dignity, which is a whole other thing. So, al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsa. The mu'min never humiliates himself. He never abases himself. It's a hadith. Al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsahu. He does not abase himself. So when we talk about humility, it's not humiliation. You don't humiliate yourself. You humble yourself. And so he says, adhulla wa da'ata. Da'a is to be low. And the Prophet ﷺ said, nothing raises itself illa wada'ahu Allah, except Allah will abase it. That's the sunnah of Allah in His creation. If you raise yourself, Allah will abase you. And so that's really important. Because these are wisdoms, And now, with Allah, you should have dhul. With Allah, you should be dhalil, but not with His creation. So before Allah, you should be dhul. You should have a sense of dhul, wal hawan, wal da'a, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Sidi Abdul Qadir al-Jilani said he saw all of the doors to Allah, and they were all crowded except for one, al-dhul wa tawada', the door of humility and humbleness. And so he said to people, halumma ila rabbikum, come, you want to get to your Lord, this is the door, because nobody's there. So it's hard on the nafs. And so he warns just not to do that. And then he says, وَاكْبُرْ عَلَى الْغَنِيِّ الْمُسْتَكْبِرِ. Not only that, be proud in front of a rich, arrogant person, right? somebody said, there's the noble things of this world are a ghani mutawadi', right? A rich man who's humble. That's a nobility. And a Sunni sharif. A sharif who's a Sunni is like that's one of the noble things. There's other ones that they mentioned, but the al-ghani al-mustakbir is the norm. Rich people, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَنْ رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Haven't you seen how the man, when he becomes wealthy, independent, he deems himself independent when he becomes rich, and that causes him to transgress. So he transgresses the boundaries of Allah because he has wealth. And that's why, like Nimrud, because Allah gave him dominion in the earth, he thought he was God, or he argued with Ibrahim. And this is what wealthy people do, right? They think because they have wealth, it gives them the right to have an opinion about everything, to be an expert on everything, to etc. etc. It's a serious. So he said, التكبر في وجه المتكبر صدقة. It's a hadith, and in riwayah ibadah. The person is ibadah. The next disease is karahatu dham. Dham is blame. Insan, it means to blame him. Adhummuhu. Dham is to blame. The nature of the human being is he does not like to be blamed. That is part of our nature. It's inherent in the human being. We don't like to be blamed. We teach it to our children early on. We praise them for things and we blame them for other things, and they start seeing that the praise is nice because it goes with it smiles, gifts, love, hugs, whatever. And the blame is painful because usually it goes with that frowns, anger, raised voices, sometimes physical abuse, these type things. So we teach early on children about praise and blame, and they learn very quickly to want praise and to dislike blame. The problem is that it becomes a disease, karahiyatu dham, because there's a lot to be learned, first of all, in them, but also some other things which he's going to clarify here. He says, karahatu dhammi banan ma'lufu. It's a well-known disease. وَنَذْرُ الْعِبَادِ وَالْوُقُوفُ مَعَهُمْ حِجَابٌ عَنْ مَقَامِ الْإِحْسَانِ. So what he's saying is, displeasure with blame is a well-known disease of the heart. Concern with creation's opinions and desiring their praise and displeasure at their criticism becomes a barrier between you and the station of ihsan. Because what you start doing is you start doing your actions in order to be blamed or praised. And one of the things in the Sirah class, Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, radiyallahu anhu, when they bring him to do, the Prophet says to the Aus, will you accept, because the Bani Qurayza were confederates of the Aus, and because the Khazraj got Bani Nadir off the hook by the intercession of Abdullah bin Ubay, the Aus want to get the same for Bani Qurayza. So the Prophet ﷺ, Bani Qurayza was actually much worse what they did than Bani Nadir, right? I mean, it's all relative, but the fact that they were joining the army. Bani Nadir were attempting to assassinate the Prophet, which is actually worse, in the big picture of things. But the point is that Sa'd ibn Mu'adh said a really important thing. When he came out, they were telling him, please, have the Prophet forgive him, just like the Bani Nadir got off. And he said, I have reached a point where in my mawqif, I have no fear for the La akhafu lawmata la'im. I'm not worried. He was about to die. He said, I'm not in a position to be worried about what people are going to say. See, because what else was worried about was, what are people going to say? These are our confederates, and if they all get killed, they'll say the Khazraj got their confederates off, but the Aus didn't get their confederates off. You see? So they were thinking about what people are going to say. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh said, I'm about to meet my Lord. I'm not concerned about what people are going to say. So he said, Al-ana, now, وَجَدْتُ نَفْسِي فِي مَقَامٍ لَا أَخَافُ فِيهِ لَوْمَةَ اللَّائِمِ. I found myself in a place which is right before death. I'm not worried about what people are going to say. The point of that is, the reality of it is, you are in that moment at every instant of your life. Death it's just a veil to think that that's Tul al-Amal, which is another disease. It's a veil from Allah to make you think, oh, I'm going to, be around It's a complete illusion. You have no guarantees whatsoever. And so what this is saying is ihsan that's where Sa'ad was. He was in maqam al-ihsan. All he could see was Allah. He wasn't concerned about creation. And that's the point. With this karahiyatu dham, you start worrying about what other people are going to think. And that will often prevent you from doing the right thing, because very often the right thing is what everybody else is going to be against. And that's the nature of the world. So taking the right position often means taking the position that you will be blamed for by others for doing it. And very often courageous stances, they become known later on, right? I mean, for instance, Geronimo is a good example. Geronimo was this evil, horrific barbarian when he was fighting against the U.S. cavalry. Now he's seen as a hero by both the whites and the Native Americans, as this great freedom fighter fighting for his land. At that time, even his own people betrayed him. So he was taking a position at that time when even his own people were against it, because they'd already mostly had surrendered. He kept fighting till he was finally betrayed by people around him. But the point is that, people like Malcolm X, another example. See, Malcolm X, once the enemy even co-opts, and this is what they'll do, because then the enemy will praise him, because he's no longer a threat now. Enough time has passed where he's no longer a threat, so we can co-opt him now, right? And this is what they'll often do. But at the time, he was taking positions in a society where everybody was against him, you see. And then later, when society maybe catches up or whatever, or he's no longer, then they can say, but at that time, had he worried about them, he wouldn't have been able to say the truth. And that's what people, that's what happens when people are concerned with what other people think. They're not able to take those positions that are courageous for the very reason that they're unpopular, and they're ones that you'll often be attacked for. And then he says, overcoming that barrier, so getting beyond that, is through the realization that there's no benefit or harm. Again, this is, if you notice, this is often a cure for a lot of these diseases, is really recognizing Allah, two names of Allah. These are two names of Allah, An-Nafi' wa Dar. Nafi' is the one who benefits, and Dar is the one that harms. And those are attributes of Allah, and no one else has those attributes. No one. No human being has those attributes. It's only Allah that can benefit, and it's only Allah that can harm. So if you're worried about what people think, and it's preventing you from doing what you should do for the sake of Allah, then you're not seeing reality. You're deluded. You're in a delusional state. And you're seeing things in a way that's it's not conducive to your iman, but it's also, it's simply not it's not in accordance with reality. It really isn't. So that's what you have to realize, all of us have to realize, is Allah is the only one that can harm or benefit us, which is why the Prophet ﷺ said to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, when he told him, he gave him some advice, he said, إِذَا اسْتَعَنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ, when you seek help, only seek help from Allah. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ, and if you ask, only ask from Allah. And then later he says that you have to know that even if all of creation got together to harm you, they couldn't harm you except with what Allah decreed for you. And if they got together to benefit you, they couldn't benefit you except with Allah, what Allah has decreed for them to benefit you for. So creation can't do anything to you. They can't harm you and they can't benefit you. Now this obviously does not mean not recognizing the asbab and saying, oh, well, the Prophet ﷺ on the Battle of Uhud wore 2 chain coats of armor. These are asbab. Now he knows more than anybody else there's no harm and there's no benefit from Allah, except from Allah. But that doesn't negate using the intellect and recognizing we are in a world of asbab. And also this means also diplomacy. Because sometimes, like the poet said, I said the truth, but not the truth shouldn't always be said. So that it's discreet and it's intelligent not to say the truth. You have to look and see things. I mean, I know a friend of mine who's Libyan, with a Libyan delegation that was in Iraq, and they were at this big thing. He was an Azhari graduate, and and they were all like toasting, and one of these shayateen is making a toast to the Ba'ath party, right? And this Libyan man, he's an older man, he died recently, rahimahullah, but he said, لَعْنَ اللَّهِ حِزْبِكَ وَمَنْ دَعَى لَهُ, and he started cursing. They were official delegation. He said, may Allah curse your party and curse anyone that prays for it, and curse things that were there with him. They suddenly thought, this is it, And they start telling him, he's got some screws loose, and we brought him along. He's, a good family and everything, but don't pay any attention to him. And they, nothing happened to them. But the point is, you shouldn't have gone there in the first place, right? There's no reason to be there supporting those people, but that was not really a very sagacious thing to do. Simple as that, So you have to, Allah reward kalimat al-haq amam sultan al-jaya. So Allah reward him. He was a strong man, he was a good man. But the point is that, that you can do that. And the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, أَعْظَمُ جِهَادٍ, the great and the sultan is speaking the truth in front of an oppressive tyrant. That is the greatest jihad. And if you die for it, you're shaheed, there's no doubt. But that's not always called for in certain instances. In other words, if there's benefit in long term, if there's benefit, and this is the nature of al-harb al-khid'a, that war is strategy and things like that. So there are situations where you really have to weigh things out, measure things out. And then he says, ثُمَّ الْحَرَامُ مِنْهُ مَا جَرَّ إِلَى مُحَرَّمٍ كَمَا الْغَزَّالِ فَصَّلَ or al-Ghazali. And then he said, the impermissible from this disease is what in turn leads to the prohibited, just as Imam al-Ghazali has clarified. So in other words, what is haram from karahiyat al-dam? Because it's a natural thing to not like to be censored or blamed. But what he's saying is haram is what will lead to the haram. So for instance, if you should do amr bil ma'ruf and nahi an al-munkar, but you're worried about, what are they going to say, or what are they going to think, or what, and so it stops you from doing an obligation out of fear of lawmat al-la'im, right? The blaming one, the one who blames you, out of fear that you don't do what the obligation. Or you're in a place where you should pray, but your co-workers, you start thinking, what are my co-workers going to think if I ask to go out and pray? Because it's not a very popular thing in America, right? To pray. So you start thinking, what are they going to think? They might talk about me, or they might say that is clearly karahiyat al-dham, where it's not appropriate, In other words, being worried about having people think badly of you for doing things that are not good things, that is a good thing, and it's a normal thing. All right. So the what is haram from this and the disease is those things that will prevent you from fulfilling your obligations. Now, another thing about this disease, which is important, is the fact that real iman does not get established in the heart. According to the tradition of Ibn Mas'ud, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يستوي فيه الذم والمدح, until blame and praise is the same. In other words, you're doing it for Allah and you don't really care what other people think. That is real iman. That when you are doing something for the sake of Allah, and if somebody praises you, big deal. If somebody blames you, big deal. I did it for the sake of Allah, and Allah knows that. And that's what you're concerned with. You're not concerned with the eyes of others. So that's a really important point. The perfection of and another thing, just a little sidetrack. One of the things that I learned in West Africa, which was really good, I thought, was one of the things they never do in the desert is they never have little children do displays of like their memorization of Qur'an, or oh, come on, let's hear you say this or that, and then everybody says ahsanta. They don't ever do that. They don't display the children, and I think that's really a harmful thing for children to do that, personally, because it leads to a desire for doing these things for praise, and it begins the early roots of riya, and a desire for showing off and things like that. And obviously, there's people that want to show off their children, which is natural. And I think even Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, when Ibn Umar, he was in a gathering and the Prophet asked which tree is like the palm tree, is like the mu'min in the desert. And so they all started mentioning all these different trees. It's amazing, the obvious is often hidden from everybody, because the most obvious thing was the palm tree. And nobody could get it. They're saying, the Talha, the, Zainab, all these different trees. And Abdullah ibn Umar was there, and he was thinking it's the palm tree. But he was too embarrassed because there were big Sahaba there, and he was a young boy. Abu Bakr was there, Umar and Uthman, and so he didn't want to say anything. So when he went out, he told, because nobody got it, finally the Prophet told him, and he told Umar, I knew it was the palm tree. And he said, I would have loved for you to have said that. In other words, he would have been proud for his son to have said that, because he's Ibn al-Khattab. The next disease is antipathy towards death, karahiyatul maut. And he says about it, karahatul mauti bihaythu yanfiru minhu wa ya'nafu idha ma yudhkaru hatta ka'annahu bidhawqi kulli nafsin lahu alladhi ata dhu jahli. So he says, antipathy towards death, this dislike of death, having a natural dislike when is when one flees from it and becomes annoyed when it happens to be mentioned, as if he is completely ignorant of Allah's words. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Allah says every soul will taste death. So it's our inevitable end in this world is death, and each one of us will taste it. And so a dislike of death, he's saying, is when one flees from it. قُلْ إِنَّ هَذَا الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مُلَاقِيكُمْ ثُمَّ تُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ عَالِمِ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ. Say that this death that you're fleeing from, you're going to meet up with it, tulaqi. You're going to meet it. And then you'll be returned to the knower of the seen and the unseen worlds, and he will tell you, inform you. So death is inevitable, and if you flee from it, or there's people like in this culture, which some people term it a death denial culture. I mean, Muslims, this is less so for Muslims than it is for non-Muslims. Non-Muslims actually will avoid mentioning death. They don't like to talk about it. They don't bring it up in conversation. It's actually considered almost a bad manners to bring up death in this. I had to go get a passport, and I was in the federal building, and I was going up, and there were these two guys. I don't know who they were, but they looked kind of like